Here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, we're going to talk more about Cole Holcomb, the linebacker the Steelers signed, and how it fits into Omar Khan's plans financially for what the Steelers are building ahead of the draft as they make moves in free agency. That, what happened with Orlando Brown going to the Bengals, and what's going on with Jalen Carter, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app and especially on YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on the video if you enjoy it. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel, of course, is America's #1 sportsbook. And go to FanDuel Sportsbook right now, the official sportsbook of the NFL and an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Now, Steelers fans, I did some updates. We've talked a little bit about Cole Holcomb a little bit. Had more time to do some research on my way driving from Dayton, Ohio to Greensboro, North Carolina. As I've said before, I've been on this crazy trip covering Pitt basketball and March Madness for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. You can get all my content at post-gazette.com there. I want to talk to you guys, though, more about what the Steelers are doing in free agency. And we talked a little bit about Cole Holcomb in an update video and audio podcast episode that I did in the middle of Wednesday, and I posted it up for everyone to have. But we're going to just take a little bit more to recap what my thoughts were there and give you some more insight, and then how it fits into Omar Khan's plan here. And to help me do that, I reached out to our friend David Harrison, who runs the Locked On Commanders podcast and covered Cole Holcomb, the new Steelers linebacker, who the Steelers agreed to a 3-year deal with on Wednesday. Here's David with his thoughts on Cole Holcomb.
While Cole Holcomb spent a relatively short amount of time with the Washington Commanders, he accomplished a lot in that 4-year period. From being a 5th-round draft pick in 2019, Holcomb earned the job of setting Jack Del Rio's defense in 2021 and became a team captain in 2022. A foot injury cost him the last 10 games here in Washington last season, and instead of just turning to the next man up the way teams so often do, Washington completely altered its defense to make up for the loss of Cole Holcomb. If he's healthy once again, the Pittsburgh Steelers are gaining a leader with the motor you want to see on the field and the football IQ to consistently be in the right place for his defense. In Washington, it's going to be sad to see him leave, but I look forward to seeing if he can continue to elevate his game in the next 3 years the way he did during the first 4 with the Washington Commanders.
Big thanks to our guy David Harrison over there at Locked On Commanders for his insight into Cole Holcomb. And that's kind of the vibe that you get when you watch this guy on tape. He loves football. He's willing to be physical. He's athletic. He seems very accountable. He wore the green dot for the Commanders. Lots of good signs that he could be there. Now, the one thing that's going to be questionable, that foot injury, is he fully recovered? We'll find out. But it seems like he's a guy now that fits in and pairs with Myles Jack. And all things that we account for here, he's better in coverage than what Robert Spillane was. Robert Spillane went and signed a 2-year deal for $9 million with the Las Vegas Raiders. Good for Robert Spillane. Way to make your money in the NFL. And the Steelers fans can't be mad at that at all. He did what he could for the Steelers. He'll do what he can do for the Las Vegas Raiders. But I think what we were all looking for the Steelers to do in this free agency class and in this offseason, because the NFL draft still needs to address this at some point. But I think we were all looking for the Steelers to find at least one other linebacker who could work with Myles Jack, who could be decent in coverage and help stop the run, and also be an accountable player who could be in the right spots. Because as we know, off-ball linebacker, you have a lot of responsibilities both in coverage, but also in addressing gap integrity. Because if your defensive line's winning, that's awesome. But if you have linebackers behind them who are missing the holes, not reading where the running back's going, you're not taking account of the gaps that they're supposed to be responsible for, the entire play can break down. And Cole Holcomb, by all accounts, in the film that I've been able to study over the past, I'd say 16 hours or so, he looks like a guy that can do that consistently when he's healthy. And if he is a leader type of guy, it adds another strong veteran presence to the Steelers locker room. And I think it sets the Steelers up for a good opportunity to go draft a linebacker, maybe on day 2 somewhere, add him to the room. And then if he shines, great. You have Miles Jack, Cole Holcomb, and a rookie that you really like on top of a developing Mark Robinson. If he doesn't shine right away, okay, he's your backup guy and you're learning under him, but you're giving yourself some off-ball linebacker depth, some athletes that could be really helpful there. And I think it strikes the tone that what we're seeing of Omar Khan across the board right now for free agency. The Steelers aren't making huge splashes right now. They're making really good shots. Now, they're signing Larry Ogunjobi to the deal that he was. That was a strong, bold move by the Steelers to say, hey, we're keeping this guy that we really like here. We like what he did last year. We think he's going to carry that on for the next few years. But looking at the contract numbers that we officially have data on right now, if you go to overthecap.com, you look at contracts like Patrick Peterson. It's only a $4.2-ish million cap hit when you look at his cap hit and how that impacts the team. Nate Herbig, the lineman they got from the Jets who used to play for the Eagles as well, a $2.5 million cap hit. I still haven't seen Damontae Kazee's official numbers and how that'll play out, and we still haven't gotten Holcomb's numbers, but these are all read like very reasonable contracts to get veterans on the squad or keep guys on the squad who you think that are going to be solid players, good contributors, and provide something that fits to the scheme that what you're trying to build. We talked about yesterday with Josh Taylor, the defense, trying to emphasize turnovers. That's why they got Patrick Peterson, who's been making really good plays on the football, even though he's outside of the prime of his career. We've talked about they wanted to get more physical in the run game and be more dominant there. So Najee Harris and Jalen Warren can be more tone setters. You go and get a run blocking or a left run blocking guard and Nate Herbig, and now he can come in and challenge Kevin Dotson next year in training camp. And I see you're making moves all across the board. And Cole Holcomb, he's going to help you stuff the run. He's going to help you be that physical defensive front while also being less of a liability in coverage the way Robert Spillane was many times. And here's the thing, and I think this is the bottom line of what Omar Khan's doing here. And this part isn't all that different from what Kevin Colbert used to do. He is getting guys that allow the Steelers to say, hey, you know what? You feel really good about this guy being a starter if he has to be, but you'd feel even better if you struck gold with the rookie that you had and add that person to the mix. And I think you're looking across the board, you're kind of happy with these guys, at least on paper, and what they've been able to show in recent seasons and how they could fit in what the Steelers are trying to do and the image they're trying to build and the identity that they're trying to build on both sides of the ball. These are good moves, in my opinion, by Omar Khan. And we still have to see how they play out. These guys, any of these guys could be really good, really bad. You know, NFL players take different turns at different times of their careers. But at least reasonably on paper and what the contracts are looking like that we've seen so far, Omar Khan is just making sure the Steelers are addressing a lot of their weaknesses. And I think he's doing something that's very interesting here because a lot of people are talking about, are wondering, could the Steelers make a big splash move and sign one of these big free agents like the Bears signing all these big free agents? The Steelers don't need to necessarily do that unless they absolutely want to, because they've already paying superstar players like the Chicago Bears being able to sign Terrain Edmonds to like an $18 million deal. The Steelers don't need to do a deal like that with a guy because they're already paying TJ Watt a whole bunch of money, and they're already paying Minka Fitzpatrick a whole bunch of money, and they're already paying Cam Hayward a whole bunch of money. And there's guys that they've actually had and developed on their team who are making the big contracts that these other teams are offering out to their guys. That's not saying that the Steelers shouldn't still look for the opportunity to bring someone in that's really talented. But I think what the Steelers are doing right now is they have some of their big contracts and they're trying to fill in their other spots with decent contracts so that they can eventually, so that they're not overspending anywhere. They can compensate for any other moves that they're trying to make. And then they're also looking in the NFL draft and saying, hey, there's no glaring weakness on the roster. Let's take the player. Let's not feel pressure to take any one player because of our roster. Let's take the player that we think is the best fit for our team right now. I think that's the plan. And right now, it seems like at least it's heading in that direction. I still think they're going to need help at corner, help in defensive line. They still think they need another backup edge rusher. Still think that they could use another offensive tackle in the mix there. It still could look at wide receiver, tight end. There's other options out there. But at least right now, I think the Steelers have a direction that does seem to be a steady path. But about the idea of the Steelers making a splash, there was a player who did make a splash, and that was Orlando Brown, an offensive tackle. The Bengals signed him, but Tom Pelissero and Jeremy Fowler were reporting on this all on Wednesday. And it seems like the Steelers were making a call. I'll give you my thoughts on what that means, because I think it can take you in two different directions here if you look at that and analyze it honestly. But before we get into any of that, I want to talk to you guys about one of our great sponsors, and that, of course, is FanDuel. FanDuel, of course, the number one sportsbook in America. And if you haven't checked out FanDuel Sportsbook yet, you need to get there right now to bet on some of these NBA games as the playoffs are approaching. And if you're a new customer to FanDuel Sportsbook, you can use their no sweat first bet that gives you up to $1,000 in bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app because it's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to threes drained, and FanDuel lets you make player prop bets and gives you so many options. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same game parlays. So don't miss out on your chance to get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. To learn more, make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. I want to take a step back to talk about another part of this, and this was the report that came out. I think Tom Pelissero and Jeremy Fowler kind of both teed off on this. First of all, the Cincinnati Bengals went and got their left tackle of the future. That's Orlando Brown, the guy from the Chiefs, 26 years old, one of the bigger names in the free agency market, signed into, I believe, a 4-year deal worth $64 million, averaging about $21 million per year, and how that pays out. We'll see. We'll get the contract details later. But point being, he was signed there. But there was a report that came out that the Steelers were one of 3 teams that were pursuing him, or at least in talks, or reached out about Orlando Brown. It was the Steelers, the Bengals, and the Jets. And Orlando Brown, big name guy, multiple Pro Bowl guy, did give up some pressures, on his side. Wasn't exactly the sharpest offensive tackle out there, but a big name, of course. And so there's 2 ways that I see that you could really read into how the Steelers looked into that situation. There's either A, they were actually trying to land him as a splash, or B, they were trying to just kick the tires and just see, hey, let's just get in contact with the guy and see what he wants and see if we can fit that in our budget. Oh, wait, he wants $20 million a year? Yeah, we're not paying that. I think it's that last one. I think it's the kick in the tires. But let's imagine for a second that it wasn't that the Steelers were like, look, yeah, we know that you want to get paid. Here's the number that we're offering here, and it was a big number. It's just the Bengals outbid them as far as to getting Orlando Brown and the money they were willing to shell out for him. If it is that, what do you think that means that the Steelers could do in the near future when it comes to free agency? It means that there is money to spend here that Omar Khan is willing to burn on this free agency period. And I guess I shouldn't say burn. It's just, he's just spending it to try to fix the roster. But it does mean, I think the Steelers, there's some aggressiveness to be had there. And there's still guys out there that they could get. There's still defensive linemen, offensive linemen, edge rushers, corners, receivers, tight ends. There's all sorts of guys that are still out in the field that everyone, is going to be able to get after here. We still haven't seen what they're going to do with the Terrell Edmunds situation. Do they sign him back, or do they go get another safety to add depth? Or do they wait to the draft to address the other safety position because they've already signed Damontae Kazee? Lots of those type of questions are still sitting in for me, and that's where I'm intrigued. If it is that, and the Steelers were actually pursuing Orlando Brown, and maybe they didn't offer $21 million a year or something like that with whatever the Bengals offered. Maybe they offered more like 17 or 18. That's still enough to get other guys in there, and so I think that possibility, we should put a pin in it. And I encourage you, Steelers fans, put a pin in that possibility that maybe just maybe Omar Khan and the Steelers front office does have some money that they're waiting on for the right guy to spend to bring them in and make them a good part of the picture that they're building right now. But as I said before, I think it's the other side of this. I think they were kicking the tires and saying, hey, let's see what this guy wants. The Steelers do this a lot. There's a lot of times that, Mike Tomlin has talked about, like during the draft process, he loves to get to see all the guys because he loves to connect with them. He loves to know who they are. The Steelers front office does their due diligence so that you never know when a Minkah Fitzpatrick situation rolls around where, the Steelers knew they were never drafting Minkah Fitzpatrick because he was going to go way too high before they could pick it 18th overall. But when it was time and when the Dolphins were blowing things up and Minkah Fitzpatrick wanted to get out of there, guess who they had a good relationship with? Minkah Fitzpatrick. And then he was a part of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and it was something that they were able to make work. And now he's a multiple first-time All-Pro free safety for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So that process also, we've learned the Steelers, they keep in touch with guys who are free agents. They don't try to burn those relationships just because they get drafted somewhere else. And it's very possible that some of this is just, hey, let's just see what this guy wants before he gets into this other deal over there. And who knows, maybe down the line, it'll work out for them in the future. Patrick Peterson, a guy who's signing now with the Steelers, I'm pretty sure the Steelers kicked the tires on him a few times, because how many times, if you're a Steelers fan and you know this, if you were there during that time, but how many times did the Steelers fans say, go get Patrick Peterson when he was in his prime and he was going to cost $25 million because he was one of the top corners in the NFL? That was a common occurrence back then. And I guarantee you, Steelers probably at least called his camp and been like, hey, what's up? Oh, you want that? Oh, well, we can't do that, but let's stay in touch. And now he's here with the Steelers. And I'm not saying like Orlando Brown is going to be a Steeler in 6 years when he's 32 years old or anything like that. But I think this is all part of the process that they do to just catalog, keep in touch, see who they can get. Now, who could they get? That's still a big question, because if you're going to get an offensive tackle, also if they're inquiring about offensive tackle, that should tell you they're going to be looking at them in the NFL draft, like when Mike Tomlin was looking at Broderick Jones. And I think that's going to be something to keep an eye on, because despite people saying, oh, well, no, they're happy with their offensive tackles, I think the Steelers are content with what Chukwuma Okorafor has done so far. And I think that they understand that Dan Moore Jr. is making progress, but I think they also know they need to get better there a lot quicker than they are right now. And that's where the interest in offensive tackle is going to be. And I'm very intrigued to see how that carries over into their plans from free agency to the NFL draft. So again, with this Orlando Brown situation, it brings to light the idea that maybe there's a few other things, there's a few options here. One, the Steelers are just doing their due diligence to keep up with players, and maybe they're doing that with other guys. Maybe there's other linebackers or offensive linemen, defensive linemen that they're doing that across the board for, and we'll find out if it works or doesn't work for them. Or maybe they've got a special card to play when it comes to the free agency money. Now, I will say this, officially on overthecap.com, they're around like $5-ish million left, and that hasn't accounted for Damontae Kazee's contract. It hasn't accounted for Cole Holcomb's contract, nor has it accounted for Larry Ogunjobi's contract. So the Steelers are going to have to either let somebody else go or restructure contracts, but they can do that down the line when the deadline actually hits later in the year. So all that is on the table for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I think that's something to watch. But one of the things that was also huge news that came up on Wednesday was Georgia's Pro Day, and how Jalen Carter, the guy who was once considered the undisputed number one pick of this NFL draft class, his stock continues to fall. I noted back during the combine, Steelers fans, don't even worry about him. Maybe you got to worry about him now. We'll talk about what happened there and my opinions on how that will impact this upcoming NFL draft class in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stay tuned. I'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our discussion here for the Thursday episode here. We're going to hope to have Jenna Harner on for the Friday episode. Not sure if how it's going to work, because I'm out here in Greensboro, North Carolina, getting ready for the cover Pitt as they get ready to take on Iowa State in March Madness. It's going to be a great time doing that, but I want to make sure I'm still getting content out for you guys. So just bear with me if we're getting a little busy and hectic here as far as recording things. But let's get into the Jalen Carter situation, because the stories that came out from his pro day were not good. And according, if you remember, Jalen Carter, of course, defensive tackle from Georgia, superhuman abilities everyone saw in college and how he played. And he was a bad dude. But then On the day of the combine, when he was supposed to speak, a report leaked out, and then an arrest warrant was put out there for him. And it was reported that in a car accident that one of his teammates died in, he apparently lied to the police about his whereabouts, where he was, and he said he was I think he said he was 10 minutes away or something like that when he was actually on the scene. And that has caused a bit of a stir. And all of this tapers back to Todd McShay's report back during the middle of the season when he said there are front offices with character concerns of Jalen Carter. And I brought this back up on the Locked On NFL podcast when all this stuff started to break out down at the combine. And I said this back then. I said, I don't think Todd McShay was saying, hey, I know that Jalen Carter is a bad guy. I think he was just saying, hey, these NFL teams do a ton of research. They have shadow men. They have people that are digging deep. They have people that know things that you and I will never know about some of these athletes. And I guess that, and what I took that as to believe is that some of these front offices did let Todd McShay know, like, hey, we did some digging, and we're not saying that we're not going to take the guy, but there's some things that we need to see answers for. And here we are with some of the with at least that one. Now, that was compounded with now after the combine, he didn't compete at the combine, he didn't speak at the combine, he spoke a little bit afterwards to certain people, but it was kind of seen like, okay, well, Georgia's Pro Day is going to be March 15th. That'll be his chance to kind of show everyone that he is the super athlete that he is. And then he didn't do that. And at Georgia's Pro Day, it was reported on ESPN that he actually didn't even finish. He not only didn't compete in any of the timed drills, he just did his measurements, and then he did on-field drills, and then didn't even finish them because he was exhausted. He was breathing heavy, and he was 9 pounds heavier than he was when he was measured at the combine just a little bit ago. So now people are saying, well, these are the concerns that we were hearing about, or these are feeding into the reports of the concerns that we're hearing about there. And now everyone's wondering, how far will Jalen Carter fall? Now, I think there's a few things here to note, is that we've seen top tier players tank their draft value because of poor decisions or unfortunate luck or injuries or things like that before. Laramie Tunsil, being caught in the gas mask video when he was projected to be potentially a top 5 offensive tackle. I think he got picked 13th overall that year after falling. I still am of the mind that Jalen Carter, like Kirby Smart, Georgia's coach, spoke at his pro day and said, like, this guy is one of our hardest workers. He's really tough. He shows up in games. You see the tape, trust the tape, those type of things that a head coach would say to promote their player. Jalen Carter is still a guy that absolutely you should be looking at, but it does make me wonder how much he'll fall. I have a hard time seeing him actually fall to 17. I think that Steelers fans are sitting there being hopeful, like, well, Chris, all these reports coming out, he's doing this, maybe he'll fall that far. I still think someone takes a shot on the guy that was a superstar defensive tackle on the best defense in the country, and people have been waiting for him to come out for like a couple of years now. And he's dealt with some injuries. He's dealt with other things as well. Maybe this is all part of that, but I just think that he's going to be, I think he's going to be a prospect that people still want to get at. Now, maybe he doesn't go first overall. Maybe he doesn't even go top 5 anymore, but he's going before 17. But I do wonder, if you're looking at this NFL draft class, if there's people that say, you know what, we really want an interior defensive lineman. We really want to push. We will upgrade there. Maybe we'll go get a Brian Brzee out of Clemson or a Kalijah Kancey out of Pitt, and maybe they're a little too concerned about Jalen Carter. I think that there will be enough teams that will be not as concerned with this stuff, and they'll say, hey, you know what? We'll bring him in. We'll work him out. We'll get him back up to football shape and get him in the place that he needs to be our best football player. I don't think he does, but I don't think he gets there. But what I think could happen is that maybe if that does impact things, and that shakes things up, maybe some of the teams that would have been, are really interested in defensive line take that position more, and maybe that opens up one of the other positions the Steelers are looking very hard at. Now, defensive line is one of the positions I think the Steelers should be keeping an eye on. We've talked about that. Yes, they signed Larry Ogunjobi. Yes, they have Cam Hayward. Yes, they drafted DeMarvin Leal, but they still want to get stronger up there in the near future. Again, I think a lot of these moves have been to solidify all the position groups so they don't have to draft a specific position. But if one guy falls in their lap, they're not going to complain about it. And who knows? Maybe Jalen Carter will be that guy. I don't think he will be, because he's going to be gone. But let's say because of this, there's teams that want defensive tackles, and maybe they want to get a different guy that's not Jalen Carter, who has these issues, and maybe there's legitimate concerns there, and it passes down. If there's a few more defensive linemen being taken ahead of the Steelers, that just bumps down the other positions. And maybe, two positions that we've talked about a lot in this offseason that could go in that first round that I think could be good fits are offensive tackle and cornerback. And truly, there's 3 offensive tackles that we've talked consistently about having the right value at 17. Of course, Peter Skoronski of Northwestern, who Pat Meyer, Steelers offensive line coach, visited on Monday for his pro day. Then, of course, there's Paris Johnson, the offensive tackle out of Ohio State, who's built like the prototype of this group, and he seems to have all the measurables, needs to get a little bit sharper, but they're willing to work with that. And then, of course, there's Broderick Jones, who's kind of the bigger mauler of the group, who measures well, fits well, tests well, and looks like he would be a really good fit as well. The question is, would one of those guys fall? And then if it's not them, then other guys at the cornerback position, Christian Gonzalez, who I think will go top 10, but Devin Witherspoon didn't run at the combine, has an injury. Maybe his value shrinks down to 17. Maybe it pushes some of these decisions. And that's where I think that this could be very interesting for Jalen Carter and how his situation could impact the entire draft class as far as who wants to take a risk, who doesn't want to take a risk, but still wants to address that position group, and how that might move other position groups back, or at least players back who could be selected. And if the Steelers see those opportunities, this is why I think either the Steelers, you stay put at 17, you wait until your term comes up, and if that situation played out where one of those guys falls to you, you take him, you celebrate, you're happy about it, you get ready for pick number 32. But if your guy isn't there, let's say it doesn't play out. Let's say Jalen Carter still goes top 5 and everything plays out. 3 offensive tackles are off the board. The top cornerbacks are off the board. All the guys that you had graded for the 17th value overall are picked. Then you can then say, okay, let's look at the trade back scenarios that we've been talking about, where they try to pick up an extra day 2 pick for moving back in the first round. All those things are on the table. But again, this is going to be very interesting to monitor and to follow whose stock rises and falls as this time goes. Because now with Georgia's had its pro day, there's a bunch more pro days coming down over the next month, where players are going to be showing coaches what they have. We'll get to see where Mike Tomlin goes, where Omar Khan goes, where different Steelers coaches go, and that could give us more hints as far as who they are focusing on the most. We'll keep you updated with that and a lot more right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks so much for checking us out here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. You can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content, because we thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. Again, I'm out here in Greensboro, North Carolina, so excuse me while we're still kind of recording out in the wild. We'll keep this up for another episode at least. Who knows? Maybe if Pitt's still dancing, I'll be doing it again all for the next week, next couple weeks, but we'll find out on that soon. But again, back tomorrow on Friday for another episode of Locked On Steelers. We hope to have Jenna Horner on to keep that thing going and get you ready for your weekend and see what other moves the Steelers have made in free agency. We'll see you then.